Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my pleasure to have as my guest Radha Measuria. Radha is a UK-trained doctor with over 10 years of experience working in the NHS and beyond. Having worked in hospitals across the UK and in developing countries, she brings a global perspective to her mission of transforming healthcare. As a doctor and coach, she's dedicated to helping doctors break free from their limiting beliefs to create lasting change. Her approach goes beyond quick fixes or temporary solutions. It's about empowering individuals to embrace their health, build powerful rituals, and step into a radiant identity that thrives, no matter life's challenges. She also hosts the Medicine Unraveled podcast, where she shares insights into functional and nutritional approaches to health and wellness, alongside strategies for medical professionals to craft balanced, optimized careers. Curiosity, growth, and resilience are at the heart of everything. She believes in creating ripples of positive change that will inspire and empower future generations. Radha's message: let's create a world where vibrant health isn't just a goal, it's a way of life. And Radha, welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast. I've been looking forward to this conversation for some time now.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Dave, for having me here.
So you are a global traveler. You just flew in from Germany. Now you're in Manchester, which is outside of the UK. Am I correct?
That's correct.
And you are from the UK. So good. We have an international flavor to the podcast again today. So I'm anxious to get your perspectives. I was very excited when I found out the work that you are doing and the impactful work that you're doing. And I really felt it was something that our listeners would align with. So whenever you're ready, we'll get right into it.
Absolutely. Let's do this.
Okay. First of all, Radha, please tell our listeners about your experiences that inspired both your life path and your life passions.
Beautiful question. Yeah. So from a young age, I knew I wanted to work with children. I wanted to do something that really helps them from a core level. So whether that was education or in the health side of things. And I wanted to work in developing countries, places where people didn't have the resources that I was so privileged to grow up with. And as luck would have it, or as my path would have it, I went through medicine and went into pediatrics, but also what we call wilderness medicine, expedition medicine. So I was exploring the world through my career. And that just opened up a whole new experience of what a low resource setting healthcare situation is truly like. And I went on a few missions or medical camps, if you like, in my early years, which highlighted that, yeah, I can go in there for a couple of weeks. I can prescribe some medication. These people will feel really great, for the likes of people in Africa or India. But as soon as I'm gone, what good is that if there's no sustainability behind it? If we haven't really dealt with the root of what's going on. And then I would come back to our lovely NHS system here in the UK and start to see similarities of patients coming back with, let's say, buyer's remorse, saying, well, I have this illness and you gave me a medication, but it's not better. Okay, it was good for a few weeks. You fixed it for a few weeks, but you didn't really cure it. And that's, again, where I came to a bypass of, am I really doing anything to help these people? Is that really truly what I'm doing? And I went through my own little health journey and realized that I don't want to have an operation. I don't want to take medication. So how can I advocate that for my patients? And then within that, I started to go through COVID as well and seeing colleagues burning out or just not having that passion and the drive and the having medicine as the light that shines through them. And so that's where I came to do a lot more holistic nutritional medicine. That's how I healed myself. And I wanted to teach that both to my colleagues to help them, but to help them do that for their patients too.
Yeah. And for me, I've been talking to other colleagues of mine who are looking for doctors that are versed in functional medicine, where they can get to the root cause of issues as opposed to medicating first and then seeing if it solves a problem. Because as you know, in any healthcare system or any system, one of the myths is that if we keep throwing resources at a problem, the problem's going to go away. But the problem is if you don't know the root cause of the problem and you're throwing resources and money at the problem isn't going to go away. I think functional medicine is going to be the wave of the future. I believe in a holistic approach. That has gotten me to feel almost at 70 years old now, feel better than I ever did at 35. It also requires a commitment to look at the medical profession differently. It's also, we need to be empowered to get out of what the medical profession likes to look at. We're going to get to this in a minute, the sick role. Instead of me being the patient, me advocating for myself and working collaboratively with a physician who is willing to listen. I think it sounds like with what you're doing and the approach that you're taking, that you allow for collaboration, both in your coaching and in your medical practice.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, for yourself, the listeners as well, do I deter people from taking medication or having surgeries? Absolutely not. There is a place for all of that.
Absolutely.
It's like you're saying, it's having that collaboration, having the education and the empowering side to it.
Right. Well, the other thing is what Western medicine can't address, holistic practices can. And together, and I believe in an integrated approach, I take medication, but I also do essences, I do gypsum, I do some other holistic practices to go along with that. And it allows me to live a life of balance and to live a life where I'm still engaged, where I'm still feeling good, and where I feel like I can at some point make a difference on the world. You are known as the doctor's coach. What are the challenges that doctors you work with face as it relates to career and other categories of their lives? And what services do you provide to empower them to proactively and creatively address their challenges?
So on the one hand, doctors have those common challenges of long hours and a pressurized work, no matter where you are in the world. On the other hand, they have a really unique set of challenges, which comes through as emotional fatigue and these days a growing disconnect between their personal well-being and the professional demands. And we were speaking earlier before the podcast as well about how doctors deal with the death that they see so frequently, almost daily, whether it's death in itself or having to give bad news. And as much as you're taught to give that bad news, to deliver it in a pleasant way, you're never really taught how to deal with the aftermath. And actually, it's very personal for a doctor that when somebody passes away or they go through a major life-changing event, a diagnosis, that is held somewhere inside the doctor themselves, whether they choose to deal with it, emote through it, or whether they just bury it deep down inside and allow it to fester. And that's the challenge that we see nowadays because the threshold for dealing with these challenges, I was actually having a conversation with a colleague earlier. The word trauma or traumatized has become so commonplace to us. He has family in the Middle East where they are really going through trauma.
Oh,
Yet we
absolutely.
use similar word and language for the things that we go through today. And emotionally and more so physiologically, you are having the same reaction because we have such a low threshold for dealing with these things. That doctors are not only having an emotional outbreak, they're having physical disease and outbreak. And this burnout that we call is a combination of that. And that's the biggest challenge that I get coming through to me.
Yeah, and I know my own experiences. I've had one doctor that was not versed in doing end of life information, particularly around traumatic death. With my daughter, when we got the prognosis of her cancer, it was like a 5-minute interview and saying that, look, basically with the message that your daughter's going to die unless there's a miracle. Um, there was no room for questions. There was no room for any further follow up. But, time has an interesting perspective when, you remove from something, you take a look at it from the doctor's perspective. I'm thinking, gee, she deals with death every day. She's dealing in an oncology unit, which, you're talking even with children. You're talking about out of every 5 children are going to die from cancer. That's what the statistics bear out. So she's dealing with death on a daily basis, death of young adults. I'm thinking she might have had a bad day. She might have lost somebody earlier, and she just couldn't bear to sit with us to give us more bad news. The one thing that I was appreciative is that she told me straight up what the odds were. And I'm a person that likes to know what I'm facing. But could there have been a better way for her to do it? Absolutely. But based on what you deal with doctors and they're taking death personally, I could see where she presented the information the way she did.
Yeah, it creates this cycle of overwhelming expectations as well. Doctors feel like there's all this pressure, and sometimes it just takes that moment of humanness to come down and just be at the level and just say, hey, I don't like giving this news as much as you don't like hearing it.
Yep.
And just communicating at that level.
Yeah. And, basically saying that, look, even though it looks dark, there still may be some options for clinical trials. We can still do some things maybe from a
Mhm.
functional medicine perspective or from a holistic perspective that can increase the quality of life of your loved one while we can work on trying to find a cure for the type of cancer, the type of terminal illness that they have.
Yeah.
Now, let's say I'm a doctor, okay? And if I were to retain you as a coach, what can I expect from you, and what do you expect from me?
Great question. So I actually have a really unique agreement that I have with the doctors that I work with. And I think that highlights just what we're saying here. I am a guide. I'm not here to teach and I'm not here to tell you what to do. It's not very different from consulting and mentoring. I truly believe that you have the answers within you, and I'm just here to provide you the tools and strategies to create your own personalized plan and way of getting through what you're going through and reaching the outcomes that you want. I'm not here to dictate what it is that you should do either. And it's getting through the layers in that plan, getting through all the layers to get to the core root of what's holding you back from achieving whatever it is you want to do.
Mm.
I create an open and safe environment to you. And I expect that you show up in a similar state, not holding back, being your authentic, true selves, because I'm not here to judge. I'm just here to guide.
Mhm.
And that's where the 200% relationship comes. Show up 100%, you show up 100%, and together we create this journey. And the other side of it is, yes, the coaching sessions are there for the tools, the strategies, for creating and working through the plan. But the real work happens, which people don't realize, and I would share with you straight away. It happens between the calls, between the discussions. When you start doing the actual work, you go back into your everyday work life with this seed planted in your head that, oh, what if I could look at this in a different way? And that's when a lot of things come up. And maintaining that communication, like we spoke about earlier, that communication is so key.
Yep.
That if we maintain that back and forth, that look, something came up, I bring it up, allow yourself to feel it. And that's where being coachable comes in, is I learn from you as much as you will learn from me. I love that feedback. I love to hear what actually came up, because no person is the same. And each client has their own unique amazingness. And I want them to believe in themselves. I want you to know that you can do this. And if you just play out and just lean into those fears, have some fun with it, perhaps, and maintain an open mind about and being curious about what is possible.
Yeah, and I think the collaborative approach, you can't go wrong with that because one, it's anything that's client-centered or person-centered is going to automatically take into account the individual needs of that client. And secondly, if they are buying in to this environment you're trying to create and the tools that you're trying to offer, and they're feeling empowered, they're going to take responsibility for their behavior, not only in between sessions, but they're going to say, hey, Radha, this came up right now. I think it helps the people that you work with, the doctors that you work with, maybe realizing it's okay for me to be human. It's okay for me to be vulnerable. I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to, as long as I do my best, as long as I give the best possible care that I can, it's in the hands of the universe. And that goes back to Don Miguel Ruiz as one of his 4 agreements is just do your best,
Yeah.
and then that's all we can do because doing our best, the bar for that varies depending on the circumstances that we're dealing with. And I think if we can understand that that's what we shoot for, excellence is going to follow anyway.
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up. That was straight in my mind as well. The 4 agreements, just do your best. And that is exactly it, that every day your best is going to look different. And for doctors to understand that is so important that
Yep.
you will, like you say, the doctor that you saw, maybe her best was down here that day and she was
Mhm.
expecting herself to be there, or we as a population expect doctors to be up there as well.
Yeah, we expect a lot from our physicians. Well, let me ask you, the suicide rate among doctors, I read somewhere that is pretty high. Am I correct?
That's right. They are on the rise.
I think I read doctors and nurses are 2 of the healthcare professions where suicide attempts or ideations are particularly prominent.
Yes.
And I could see why with the pressure they're under with healthcare, not only to save patients or to cure patients, but also from the families who are scared because of the possibility of losing their loved ones. They're dealing with all of that
Yeah.
energy. And I got to imagine that there's also probably some vicarious traumatization that you deal with as well.
Absolutely. Like I was sharing, like some things can be so actually traumatizing. If you've seen somebody after an accident, you've seen the way the family reacts to things. There's so many components coming in, and you just don't realize your brain has to be in some sort of survival mode for you to be able to focus and do your job. So, although you don't feel like you're taking it in, all of this external noise is still getting stored into you. You just haven't fully embraced that that is there.
Yep. And I think once we can embrace the yin and the yang of everything,
Mhm.
we become more genuine, we become more human, and we become more gentle with ourselves.
What a beautiful statement. Yeah.
Speaking of statements, it was a nice segue into my next question. I found this statement on your LinkedIn profile. I'd like to help close the gap between society's impressions and expectations from their doctors and doctors being able to deliver. From your perspective, what has caused that gap and how do we best close that gap?
I would say there's 2 parts to it. There's the unrealistic social expectations and the idea that there was a paternalistic approach to medicine in years gone by. So, in the UK at least, doctors were almost aligned with God, or heroes, if you like. You go in, the doctor knows everything, you listen to everything they have to say, and you follow that to the T. There was a high level of respect. You didn't need to think outside of the box. You didn't need to question it. They know best, and that's that.
Yeah.
Over time now, as we as a society have access to more information, there's questioning the doctors, which is absolutely fine. But to the degree that the trust is gone,
Yeah.
you still expect doctors to deliver and be your parent in the health setting. But at the same time, you're sort of saying, well, actually, I don't really want to do what you're telling me to do. I want to do it my way, but I'm not going to tell you that. I'm not going to communicate that. I'm just going to hold it inside and not fully trust you.
Yeah.
And when it comes to closing that gap, it's understanding and allowing the doctors to come down off of those pedestals and say, no, they are human, very wise, educated humans. So what they are saying isn't because they don't know their stuff. Medicine is changing constantly, so they might not be up to date with everything.
Mm-hmm.
Are they there to do a good job and actually help you? Yes. But it's humanizing it. Stop putting them up on a pedestal and then taking ownership for your own health. We are at that level now where it's not just responsibility, but full ownership. I distinguish between those two because responsibility, you still have somebody telling you what to do and you're just going to go ahead and do it.
Mm-hmm.
Ownership is saying, no, I'm going to be proactive about it. And I will learn everything I can about whatever the doctor has said. And we do a collaborative approach to whatever it is my ailment is.
And that makes perfect sense. And I was thinking as you were answering the question, it would be so cool to have a conference where you have doctors and individuals who are patients who have been receiving services from the healthcare system talk about their prospective fears, misconceptions about patient care, how they view physicians, get it all out in the open and come to some type of collaborative alliance where, okay, this is how together we can fix the healthcare system. But it takes both parties, Rod, I believe. It isn't just a doctor's responsibility. It's a patient's responsibility to say, this is what I need and be comfortable advocating for it. Because even as a therapist, I could not fully understand what my clients needed unless they told me. And I couldn't work effectively with a client on an individual basis unless I knew what their needs were. And not assuming that I knew, but asking them, what do you need from me today? What can I be of most help to you today? And if we can get that conversation going between recipients in the healthcare system and doctors and other healthcare professionals, it might be interesting to see how that would transform the health system, not only in the United States or the UK, but globally. If we did that.
Absolutely. And it's that personalized, tailored approach that's missing.
Mm-hmm.
You could see it in the holistic or functional medicine world, but sadly, that's what's missing in the bigger global healthcare systems.
You know, and I think it's also important for physicians to put aside what their biases may be towards holistic medicine. I was talking to one doctor who has left the area, but she was a holistic family practitioner. One of the things that she had mentioned that if we were talking about some of the things with other doctors, like using essences, using gypsum as a supplement for prostate health, she said doctors would look at it and just call it like folk medicine. They would just, many in Western society would just dismiss that. But in reality, she knew what the value of holistic practices were. And if you take a look at the research that's been done on holistic practices in terms of its benefit on physical and mental health, the research is pretty clear that it does have a benefit. But I'm also a firm believer in that integrative approach, complementary or Eastern medicine techniques to contribute to the quality whole health of the individual.
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes back to that open-mindedness and just being curious, not shutting it down. Do your research like you would for your medications, for the surgeries, whatever it is. You do evidence-based practice.
Absolutely.
So in the same way, and I believe we spoke about this in one of our earlier conversations, that I was raised without truly understanding and knowing with Ayurveda, with homeopathy and medicine, with a father that's a pharmacist, but also believes in these other two prongs from my own cultural background.
Yeah.
And I never saw the power of it until I came into this side of medicine, of the holistic side. And I myself would treat myself with an Ayurvedic approach. And it was, how do I integrate this and bring this to my patients?
Yeah. And, there's so many complementary practices, Rod. I mean, patients can pick and choose. I mean, you can just go on the internet and Google complementary practices or holistic practices. You're going to come up with a menu of very diverse schools of thought. So you could just take a look, give a list to a patient and say, what speaks to you? What do I want to explore? Do I want to explore herbal medicine? Do I want to explore yoga? Do I want to explore meditation, acupuncture? And there's so many different forms that they can be empowered to choose.
That's the beauty of the world right now, is that it's just at our fingertips, just as much as medical information is that, the alternate medicine, all
Mhm.
these complementary things. You, like you say, you just need to Google it. You just need to ask someone and they'll know somebody else. And it's all there.
Yeah, absolutely. I see this as the wave of the future where you're going to see functional medicine, I think, being the rule rather than the exception.
I hope so.
I hope so too. Speaking of your LinkedIn profile, we're going to stay there for a second.
Sure.
You mentioned that your work focuses on moving from a sick care system to a true healthcare system. Contrast the two systems and discuss what we need to do individually and globally to make that transition.
Yeah. The way I see sick care system is what we have at the moment. We're in a reactive state. We see symptoms and we manage those symptoms. We rely on medications and procedures, and it's a stepwise approach. You have these symptoms, I box you into this category, which means these are the things that are attached to you. You have a label, and that follows this one pathway. The health, what I believe is a true healthcare, where health is at the center of it, is you have this flurry of complementary things available to you, and you're proactive with it. Rather than waiting for the symptoms, you're already doing preventative lifestyle things.
Yeah.
And when a symptom appears, you're so connected with yourself that you are able to say, well, actually, let's tweak this, tweak that, bring this in, and do a holistic approach, which is where it comes back to that having ownership of your own health.
Absolutely. And in a partnership, it takes two. It takes both the doctor and the patient to collaborate to get the health care outcomes that patient desires, and for the doctor to provide those resources that the patient feels that they need. So,
Yeah.
people are living the human experience. A lot of them are not going to do preventative medicine, and then they're going to be faced with healthcare challenges, terminal illness. If that's the case, I would like to envision a healthcare system that that I think Atul Gawande talked about in his book, Being Mortal, Medicine and What Really Matters at the End. And one of the questions I remember him asking was, what treatments, and I'm paraphrasing this, are you willing to tolerate? What is it that you want to have happen? What don't you want to have happen? And make it a real collaborative effort. And it was almost like a hospice-like approach to the end of life, a very proactive model. How do you see your end of life chapter playing out? Do you want to do the traditional medical model? Do you want something that is going to ensure that your end of life chapter is as meaningful as the other chapters of your life? And in my death, dying, and bereavement class, Gawande's work is one of the things that I expose my students to. So if you read this book, because he's a Western trained physician who has a total different perspective on how the American healthcare system should work.
Yeah. I know his books, and he is one of the earlier whistleblowers, if you like, somebody who is there to shake things up and just put that curiosity back in. And I love the relation you made to the connection to a hospice approach. And it's a case of why wait till that part of your life? Why wait to bring in all of these things? Because we do hospice care really well these days here in the UK, bringing in all of the sound therapy and complementary medicine. And suddenly at that point of life, when everyone's just holding on and saying, I'll try anything to feel better, to prolong this. Well, why wait until that point when you could have had it all the way through and not necessarily got to this point of suffering?
Absolutely.
Better words.
And I know he quoted a research study in the book that indicated that patients who had surgeries or chest compressions or more intrusive procedures at the last week of their life, it didn't extend quality of life. And if anything, their caregivers and family could experience symptoms of depression for at least 6 months after that person died. And so I think one of the things, and this is my interpretation of his work, he questions when does quality of life take precedent over sanctity of life? And, when are life-saving measures going to interfere with quality of life? And I think that was a big question that I think was implicitly or explicitly stated being mortal. And that resonated a lot with me too, because, I believe that, life-saving procedures, if the prognosis for that individual, if those life-saving procedures are going to help that individual extend quality of life, great. If it doesn't, why should we put the family or that individual through any more unnecessary suffering?
Yeah. And it's taking that into account. Yes, there's a big part that is about the patient.
Mhm.
And especially when you're in a situation where it's life saving, it's again looking at the bigger picture and saying, well, if we cannot save this patient, what are we leaving behind? What's the trauma that we've caused to the
Wow.
family? Because they also become patients in that sense, then, because they
Absolutely.
go through so much suffering going
Yep.
through that event.
Yeah. And the last thing families want to do is enter the world of grief. I mean, they want to hang on to their loved ones for as long as they can. And that fear will come out, I think, in the interactions that they have with healthcare staff, which is
Yeah.
why they're so concerned about how their family members are doing, not just out of love, but just because I want to keep them for as long as I can keep them. So let me make sure that you're doing what needs to be done. If you could leave our listeners with one thing today, or one thing with subcategories, what would that be?
Invest in your health, because that is the greatest investment you can make. The return on investment is infinite. And the ripple effect that it can have on the rest of your life is just, you can create an extraordinary life just from focusing on that little step that you take for your health.
Yep.
I love using the analogy of a golfer, just a 2 millimeter shift in where they are aiming, and it's a drastic difference to where the ball's going to go. So 1% shift, 2 millimeter shift, whatever works for you, do that one tiny step. Don't go for drastic changes.
Mhm.
Every day, just a tiny change in your habits, your rituals, and you will see immense changes to your life as a whole, not just your health.
And that is sage advice and suggestions to live by. I don't believe you're ever too old to invest in your health
Mm.
either. You can do that at any time. Just don't invest in your health when your health is already severely compromised. Like you said, take the proactive approach.
Yeah.
If people want to get in touch with you, find out more about your services, find out more just what's going on in your world, what's the best way for them to do that, Rod?
So, as you've mentioned, I have LinkedIn and I have Facebook. So, my social media is a great place to connect with me, just learn a little bit about me and get a taste of what my world looks like. And the other side is my newsletter and my podcast. So, we mentioned the podcast, Medicine Unraveled, and my newsletter. We can drop a link below where you can sign up. And again, it's getting those hints and tips of the little things that you can do every day as a doctor, as a patient. We're all humans.
Absolutely. And we both have a lot in common. We both came into this world the same way. We're going to go out the same way.
Right.
So the distance between how dissimilar we are is not as big as we think.
No.
Radha, it was such a pleasure talking with you today. I really hope we can do this again sometime.
Likewise, this was beautiful. There's so many avenues that open up for conversation here.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that you were willing to go down the avenues that I opened up. It was a great conversation. So thanks again.
Thank you.
And with that, that is a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.